friends. Welcome back to today's episode of Life with Loverly. I'm going to go ahead and put a little trigger warning on this episode. It's going to be pretty deep. I'm sure some tears will be shed. But I feel like having this conversation out in the open is probably, hopefully, going to help somebody out there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things whenever we think of episodes like that, it's hopefully it helps somebody else out there. And also, let's be real, this is kind of like a therapy sesh for us anyway, just talking things out. So,
yeah, it's, so getting into it, I had a miscarriage earlier this year. We briefly mentioned that on the first episode of the podcast, and then I kind of talked about it a little bit on Instagram stories, but I thought kind of sharing in a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, because you kept going.
Yeah.
You were like, we got to work. Well, then you took your time off.
Yeah.
And it was like, let's get back to work.
The timing of it ended up, I mean, if you could like use the word perfect timing in this situation, it just ended up being, definitely in the Lord's plans, that's for sure. But Chris and I found out that we were pregnant in the very beginning of January, which is kind of crazy. Taking you guys back a little bit, right before everybody left for Christmas, we had a company Christmas party and we ate at this restaurant in Athens. And that night, I ended up like getting sick in the middle of the night.
I remember that because you kind of weren't feeling yourself the back end of the day.
Right.
We kind of left early that day and you were like, oh yeah, it's time to go out. I'm not really feeling good.
Literally was like not feeling well. Was like, if this wasn't for my company that I'm the CEO of, like I probably would have not gone to the Christmas party because I just wasn't feeling well. And then it was great. We had like such a good time. But then that night I got home, went to bed, woke up several times throughout the middle of the night, so sick. I was like laying on the bathroom floor, like, oh my gosh, like I was hot, cold sweats. Like I was throwing up. It was terrible. Fast forward to 4 a.m. where I was just like starting to kind of have, I think, a panic attack that I was like sick, not feeling well. I woke Chris up and I was like, you need to call 911. Yeah. Like, I think something is really wrong. Called an ambulance. My parents came over and like, they kept the kids. We went to the hospital. But I remember the paramedic asking while they like did an EKG on me, like in my bed before they like took me out. And I remember the paramedic asking like, is there any chance that you're pregnant? And I was like, I mean, I guess there's a chance. Like, and Chris was like, I mean, she would be like 3 days pregnant,
right?
Because we were like, maybe there's a way. We just didn't know.
You're like scientifically.
I know. And so I go to the hospital. I ended up just having like some stomach issues. I, spent a few hours, came home, ended up being fine, rested for the rest of the day. And then just like kind of got some other type of sickness. I think it was like,
was it the sinus infection you got?
Yeah. Like right after that. And I was sick like all into Christmas. And like for a week, I just had this like, I don't know what it was, like sinus infection, cough. And I mean, it was like just my body's immune system was like, clearly, little did I know I was actually pregnant, but I didn't know until January when I had like missed my period. I was like, okay, my app said I was supposed to start 5 days ago and like I have not started yet. So Chris and I took a pregnancy test and it was positive and we were like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. A little bit of a backstory. We did IVF to get pregnant with Collins. We tried to get pregnant with her for like 2 years before we started doing infertility treatments, did 3 rounds of IUI that were unsuccessful, went to our first round of IVF, and thankfully that's all it took, and we were pregnant with her. And then when she was like 6 months old, we had a surprise pregnancy with Hazel. And so we were like, okay, this works. Like I can get pregnant on my own. And so we've been kind of like, I would say, trying to have a third since last summer. Not really. We've been, I guess it's kind of like loosely trying, not preventing, but not really calculating.
The whole, like, if it happens, it happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when we did get pregnant, would have been like 6 months after. And so we were so excited. It's like amazing. So we go in for our first appointment. It ended up being at like the 8-week mark. So I'd had the pregnancy test. And we go into the appointment. I'm like, great, this is going to be ultrasound. Like, no big deal. I've had plenty of ultrasounds with the other babies. And we get in and like, so, Chris has his phone. I'm sure he probably still has this video. I wonder if he does. And our like ultrasound place, they have like a monitor. So you're laying back and like in front of you up on the wall.
Oh,
is
not like the little
monitor.
TV anymore. You've got like a big screen up here. Yeah.
They had like a monitor up there. And then she was doing the thing like on her side. And she's like looking around and she can see like the sac. And she's like, okay, like let's get a little closer. And we're just all like, where's the flutter? Like, okay, like surely it's coming. Like, where is it? And there was like nothing fluttering, and so it was like she was just like, let me take some pictures, like maybe the timing is off, like are you sure of the dates, like maybe you're not 8 weeks along, maybe you're only 6 weeks along and we just like can't see it yet. And I just remember like out of the corner of my eye, like Chris stopped videoing because he was like, this is not good. And so she continues to take all the pictures and she's just like, let me go get the doctor and like, let's just see. So my doctor comes in and she's just kind of like, I don't think we are not seeing a heartbeat. You're more than likely having a miscarriage. She started asking me about like symptoms and things like that, which I felt very pregnant and was having, I just didn't know. And so then she basically just kind of walks me through my options and is like, you can let your body miscarry on its own. We can schedule a DNC. You guys don't have to decide right now. It just was kind of like, this is like, what is happening now?
Boom, boom, boom.
And I was just sort of like, okay, like, are we sure we didn't, like, I don't know, but I was pretty positive on like the dates. So I didn't really think and like there was much room for error as far as like when it could have been. So we leave and she calls me back and she calls me like an hour later. Of course, like where I'm like bawling, crying, it's just like I get in the car and I'm just like, it hits me. I'm just like, well, shit, I was like, thought I was pregnant and like, so about an hour later, she calls me back and she was like, I was looking at the numbers and the like, just the measurements and like, I'm just wondering if maybe like the timing is off. Like maybe you were only 6 weeks along and we wouldn't have seen a heartbeat, and what it's measuring, we wouldn't have seen a heartbeat. So like, let's just wait and see, and we'll do another ultrasound in another week. And maybe the baby maybe its heart will start beating, maybe it was just too early.
Did you like feel in that moment like this surge of hope kind of come back?
Yeah. I definitely was like, okay, like there's a chance. Like, so you're saying there's a chance.
Right.
And Chris was a lot more like, that's great, but like, I think we know like where this is going. But I was sort of like, I just didn't want to like give up, like, and my body wasn't like having any symptoms. I wasn't having any bleeding. So I was just like, I don't like know what's going on. We, go through all the emotions over the next week, go back in the week later, and they did another ultrasound and like nothing has changed. The measurements were the same. So it was clear at that point that like the baby just stopped developing at like the 6-week mark. It really nothing happened past that. And I felt like a little bit more prepared for that ultrasound, even though it was still just like confirming the reality. But we were also like, okay, it's okay. Like, you didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
Like, this is just like, these things happen. Something could have been wrong with the baby, and that's why it didn't develop or whatever. And so we scheduled DNC because my body still hadn't done like any type of like, you know, getting rid of the miscarriage on its own. So I feel like I don't even remember the timing of everything, but I think I went in for the ultrasound and then either had the DNC like 2 days later or.
Yeah, I think that was right before you guys were going on vacation, and
it was right before we were supposed to go.
Oh yeah, we went first and then y'all went down. And that's what it was, because it was going to be, you're not going to be home for the next couple of weeks. And it was like, I don't want to
knock.
You were like, I don't want to not be home for this.
Right. And I mean, there's like so many people handle miscarriages so many different ways. What I've learned is like, I'll never judge anybody for how they feel is the best way. If they wanted to have the miscarriage on their own, have the DNC after you've lost the baby, you know. Well, we just did what was going to be best for us. And it was very simple. You know, I mean, it was very sad, but at the same time, like, I remember telling you after, I just was like, almost like glad to not be pregnant anymore.
Yeah.
Because it was like just so heavy.
Yeah.
One thing I feel like I learned just even like the few days like leading up that I knew I was like had a miscarriage and that there was no heartbeat, like telling some of our close friends and like finding out from people like I had a miscarriage too, or in between this baby and this baby I had a miscarriage. And I'm like, I had no idea. Like,
it makes you wonder about the 1 in 4. It's like, is it not more now?
Like, it is. So many people I think like silently suffer. And I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons, but I feel like we've just been very open like here. And like Nichelle's had unfortunately several miscarriages as well. And so just turning to friends who have like been through this. And one reason I wanted to just discuss it is because there's been so many messages that have come through that have said like, I don't have anybody I can like talk to about that. Like, I feel so alone, but like, thank you for saying something. Like, now I don't feel as alone.
I love the new concept of people not being afraid to wait until the second trimester. Because, you know, that's kind of like been the thing at first. Like, I want to wait till I'm 12 or 16 weeks before I tell people, because what if? And it's almost like, well, what if you did tell people and then they found out that you miscarried? You'd then have them there to support you.
Right. And that's what I told Chris. We were like going to tell our small group about the pregnancy. And then we were just decided we would wait until we did our first ultrasound. And he was kind of like, well, if we tell them, like, what if we have a miscarriage, or like, you know, how, and I was like, well, these are the people we would like want to be there and support us and like pray with us through this. And like, you know, and we did tell them. And I mean, that was like such like a hard conversation.
It's, and like, okay, so like you said, not everybody handles it the same. Number one. Number two, it's a lot different now, and a lot more, like you said, a lot more people have had miscarriages, more than you'll ever know. I know whenever I went through this, it was between 13 and 16 years ago. And it was taboo to talk about it. You just didn't talk about it. So literally, thank you, Tamiki, like, for the help, because I am still in therapy for this. I'm processing it later. It's just, I do feel like it is a smart play to have your closest people around, tell them, you know, be excited when you can be excited.
Right.
Like, you deserve that. And then that way you do have that support system after. And like, not everybody, you don't understand it till you go through it.
Right. Like, And I feel like what's been kind of an interesting thing and like something I feel like I will continue to navigate, my very best friend in the whole world found out she was pregnant like a week after. And so, of course we were like, this is going to be great. We're going to raise these babies together. They're going to be like a week or two apart. And like, that's every like best friend's dream. And so then like when I wasn't pregnant, I was like, cool. Like,
you not only lost that, you lost that like dream that you guys had of doing this together.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think that is something that people struggle with. And I even remember when I was going through IVF and like my friends were getting pregnant and I wasn't. And it felt like such like, like a shot in the heart. But at the same time, it's not that I'm not happy for them. Like it's just not me.
Yeah.
But like miscarrying and then seeing like your friends continue to like move through their pregnancy and grow their families, like it just is hard. And I think more people go through that and like have that type of like hard feeling for a little bit than anything else.
Yeah.
And of course it's like, I love that little baby that's going to become like in our family, and in her family. And, but there are just like hard parts of like thinking that you're going to do something or thinking like, oh, this is going to be great. And then it like changes course, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So for those of y'all who are also like walking through the same thing, like you're not alone.
No.
Like, and just, I think finding somebody to talk to.
I strongly advise that. I think even if it's just one person, share that with somebody you can trust. That way you have somebody by your side no matter what happens.
Right. And it's, I mean, like Chris has been amazing and so supportive, and we went, so right after this happened, we had a 2-week vacation planned to be down at the beach with our, like just our immediate family. And actually, my best friend and her family were down there as well for the first week. And it like, oddly, I like wouldn't have had it any other way, like even though she was pregnant and I wasn't, there was something about us like all being there, like our families together, like it just started this healing process, even though like I wasn't still pregnant and she was, but like it just was okay, you know, like, and then they left and went home, and we like that week of like the 8 of us all together was so much fun. And the kids had such a blast because they've got 2 kids. We've got 2 kids. It's actually kind of funny because her kids are 6 months. They're like all 6 months apart.
Yeah.
So like her oldest is 6 months older than Collins. And then her second is 6 months older than Hazel. And I'm like, well, maybe we just get back in the rotation and like I'll get pregnant and it'll be 6 months after your baby's born or whatever.
Exactly.
But then we had a week of just Chris and I and the kids, and that is where I feel like I just was like starting to heal. And like we were so intentional with like the family that we do have, and just made these memories that like, I mean, we were like, should we move here? Like, this is such a healing place. We're not moving to the beach. But
I know, I was like, well, I'm coming too.
I told Chris, I was like, we have a lot of people that we'd have to relocate. I don't know if everybody would want to do that. No, just, I mean, we were just dreaming. But it was just so healing being down there. And I think just something about like being near the ocean when you're going through some times of struggle and hardship, there's just something about it. Like, I don't know what it is, but being by like a large open body of water just is like
healing,
very healing. And then we came back and kind of like life continued on, like, and that's kind of like what it does. Like you just, yes, it's something that has happened and something that I think about. And sometimes I'm like, oh, what if like, but then there's been a lot of things that have been like, okay, well, this happened for a reason, which I'm a very big, like, everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
And
we just talked about that earlier today. It was like, think of where you are now. Think of where you're supposed to be at the end of this year. Think of all these things. And it's like, okay, God had a plan for that.
Exactly.
God has a plan for it.
Yeah. So I think it's just, I mean, at the end of the day, like, it obviously sucks.
It does.
Nobody wants to lose their baby, you know? I mean, it's
nothing to be ashamed of either. I feel like a lot of people live in shame. What they feel is like, okay, I don't want to tell anybody that I failed. Like, in their thought, they failed. And that is not what it is. It's the furthest thing from that. Don't feel like you failed or that you don't deserve to feel the way that you feel. We're surrounded by it.
Yeah. I also think there's no wrong way to grieve. So in any situation of loss, you know, for me, I needed to get away and spend time with family, but then I came back and just like hopped right back into work. And honestly, like, you and I went down and shot a bunch of content, and that was healing for me. Like, doing some of those things and staying busy was also healing in a sense. And I think people handle grief differently. So I would just encourage you, like, do what you need to do, you know, and like, don't let somebody else's story be like, well, they did it this way, so now I need to grieve this way.
Right.
You know, and if you are listening and you're somebody, you know, somebody who's going through this or has recently gone through this, I would just say, like, extending them grace, but also still including them in things and not, you know, my best friend has been like so amazing at just still being like, keep like including me in conversation of like her doctor's appointments. And I mean, I was very much like, please do not like stop telling me about what's going on. And like, because then I would feel even weirder that this has like happened to me. And so
you're scared around me. You're tap dancing around me. Yeah, exactly.
So it's also, I mean, I think sharing that and like telling your friends like, hey, I know I'm going through this, but I still want to, like, don't worry about me. Like, I'm going to be okay.
Right.
I still want to be included in part of like these conversations or discussions or whatever it is that you're wanting to still be included with. Because sometimes it's like, it can just be like awkward and hard and like, I don't know what to say because I've never been through this. And, you know, I think just like being there and being, you know, we had some of our friends just like showed up with like meals and were like, hey, we got dinner for y'all tonight. And that, even though I would be like, no, it's fine, don't worry about it, was such like a weight lifted off that we could just like be and not have to worry about some things. So I think that's a great thing if you can be that type of friend to somebody else.
Yeah. Externally, I think about things like when, you know, people mean it with the best intent, but they're like, when are you guys going to have babies? When are you going to have a second? When are you guys going to have, and just thinking about things like that before they're said, because again, you do not know what's going on the other side. I think about that. I think now because of what I've gone through, I didn't want people asking me that, you know, that hurt even more. Cause I'm like, great, you know, here people are thinking around me, like, I'm just not even like trying or whatever. It can be painful for those struggling.
Yeah, it really can. And I mean, especially it's like funny, a lot of times I'll do these question boxes and on Instagram and I'm like, ask me anything. And people will be like, when's baby number 3 happening?
Yeah.
And I'm like, cool. Well, you know, thanks for reminding me. And you know, I'm sure nobody's like meaning it like from a place
people need to like just think about that from the best intent on the other end. You know,
there's like nosy and then there's like, okay,
it's
like,
just not being thoughtful,
right?
You know, so, yeah.
But you know, I think we are in a good place now. There are definitely times, and I'm sure, you know, on like the due date in a few months, I'll be like, like that's kind of stings, you know, but
you will
something I like will never forget. And I still feel like I will remember January 5th like it was yesterday. Like we got home and we took a pregnancy test and we're like, oh my gosh, I remember telling you. I made her like test out a reel. I was like, come, let me like test the lighting for this reel that we're about to film together. And she was like, okay. And so I'm like, just kind of move around. And
I literally think I was looking at the floor and I was just like, it's just like a normal every, all the time kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, here's the lighting, and she's like, I'm pregnant. I'm like, what?
I know. And I feel like now I have like all these videos of like telling my friends and telling people like on my phone, like saved under this album. And I'm like, I don't want to delete it, but like,
you don't. It's a memory.
Like I can't yet.
Yeah.
Like, because I don't want to forget about like how special that was when we like saw that we were pregnant,
Again, grief. That's grief. I mean, it's not the same thing, but I think of like the one dog I had that passed away.
Yeah.
It's like, it hurts when I look at it right now, but like one day I'm going to be so glad I have those.
Right.
It's just a memory
that
you get to hang on to.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think just at the end of the day, if you're going through miscarriage, if you've been through one, or, for all of those who will be going through this in the future, that just is what it is.
Or if you have a friend who's going through this.
Yes. I just hope that you find comfort and just know like you're not alone. Like there's nothing wrong with you. Like this happens, but at the same time, like there's people out there who are thinking about you and praying for you, and just, you don't have to be alone in this journey. And I mean, this is just sort of a recap of where we are, and
I'm proud of you for sharing.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for, it's crazy. I feel like so obviously Nichelle and I have like shared our infertility journeys and things like that on the podcast in the past, but also we've like had a lot of like in-depth personal conversations. And I remember when I was like in between the 2 weeks of the ultrasound, I'm like getting all this hope. And you kind of were like, I don't want to like give you, I almost don't want to have this conversation with you, because I just don't want you to like pop out of this like place of hope, but like I need you to understand the reality. And that, I feel like, conversation was very hard to hear, but it prepared me for going into like the result of like,
it was tough saying it too. Like, it was very tough saying it, but I'm like, I think that this is something I'd want to hear at the end of the day too.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but you used your experience at going through a miscarriage to comfort me and just like kind of level set expectations. And I mean, you were so kind in the way you presented it. We had the conversation, and there was nothing like wrong with the conversation. It was just like, but reality, like, let me just give you some expectations. But a friend who hasn't been through that wouldn't be able to have that conversation with somebody.
Right.
So, I'm sure me going through it, I will be able to help somebody in the future. I mean, I think if you just can, once you get past it, just knowing that you might be able to help somebody. I mean, I had conversations with friends that still continue to check in on me, and they're like, how are you doing? Like, I was just thinking, I was thinking about my miscarriage. Something randomly popped in my head, and I just want to check in on you. I mean, I had mine 5 years ago, and still like flutters of like things happen. So I hope to be that type of friend someday.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Well, we appreciate you guys listening to this tough conversation. I hope that it helps somebody out there. If you're going through this right now and struggling, just know that you're not alone, and that we're praying for you and thinking about you. So thanks for being here.
Until next time.